Welcome back to the SAR Experience with Saul and Caleb. We are honored to have Gershon Rosenberg and Ari Blechner here.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
As many of you guys know, Gershon, you wrote the article that was going all around the Yeshiva League, all around SAR, titled SAR Should Encourage a Broader Understanding of the Gaza Conflict, and Ari Blechner, I hope some of you know, wrote a letter to the editor responding to Gershon's article.
And we're going to have a link to both Buzz articles in the comments, so make sure to read that before you listen.
And before we get into it, we want to ask you, Gershon, why and how did you come to the decision of choosing SAR?
I went to like a right-wing Haredi black hat type of school. So SAR was kind of like the modern Orthodox option that I had. And I also think that SAR is a school based on values, and that's something I admire about it.
Mm-hmm. And Ari, you came from the academy, so it was a pretty easy decision, yeah?
Yeah, it wasn't really much of a choice. I had an older sister who was there. It was the only place I applied to, academy to high school pipeline.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So let's get right into the elephant in the room. Gershon, when and why did you feel the need to write this article? How did it form in your mind?
Yeah, maybe go into the process of it all as well.
Yeah. So I think I'm in a lot of like left-wing circles. Obviously, I follow a lot of like right-wing Israeli media as well. And I think that the religious Zionist community, including at SAR, was really not talking about what was happening inside Gaza. And I think that we need to do more to hear the Palestinian perspective, as I said in the piece. So yeah, that's really how it came to be.
Would you say how far into the conflict would you say that, or is it very soon in that you realize you have to put something out?
Well, if you want really the background, it was meant to be a piece talking about the teachers' perspectives on the war, actually. Mm-hmm. But obviously, like a lot of teachers didn't want to go on the record about that. So I ended up writing the opinion piece, because I had a deadline.
Yeah.
I still agree with the piece, but yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you're allowed to or want to get into it, but I think there's some knowledge that there was an unedited article before the one that was published. Do you want to get into that? Or?
And were you maybe upset that they didn't let you publish your raw version?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say and what not to say. I will say that, yes, it was originally censored. I disagree with the decision, but I respect it. I understand, like, SAR has a lot of pressure to not publish that type of thing. So, yeah, I definitely understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned a lot throughout your article that you feel there's maybe a lack of education to the other side of this conflict within our school. But as a 10th grader, as seniors, we feel that at the end of 10th grade, they talk about both sides. And then even when you get to 12th grade, they have modern Israel classes where we heavily discuss both sides of the conflict. So how did you come to that decision in your article to state that about SAR?
Yeah, this is a question I was anticipating that I wasn't really sure how to answer because it was mostly based off of vibes. I don't really have like an exact reason. I think the visceral knee-jerk reaction to the piece kind of confirmed my fears that we don't do enough to hear the Palestinian perspective.
Mm-hmm. Do you think being in the middle of that 10th grade curriculum has your opinion maybe changed a little bit? Or
I think I don't want to get into everything. I'd be happy to speak off the record. I will say that I think the curriculum comes from a liberal Zionist perspective that you could critique from the right or from the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And do you maybe believe that you could have generalized the SAR student population maybe as too misinformed? I think there was a lot of, you said there was a visceral knee-jerk reaction, but I think that may have been justified when people may have felt somewhat personally attacked when you saying that they maybe don't know much about this conflict and that they aren't, maybe the school isn't educating them, but they could be doing research on their own, and maybe they felt that you were belittling the SAR students.
Yeah. I think that the SAR student body is made up of smart students who are able to come up with their own nuanced opinions, but you can't come up with a nuanced opinion without hearing the other perspective.
And another thing a lot of people touched on was that there was really no mention of the hostages in your article, which I think people, were upset about. Can you elaborate what went into that decision? Because as a lot of us feel, it provides a lot of context to the situation, is a very big part of the conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. if I would have written an article, like an op-ed, talking about how evil Hamas is and how awful October 7th is, I would be preaching to the choir. There's no one I have to convince at SAR that's true. While the Palestinian perspective, I really feel that people don't really hear that so much.
Yeah. I mean, personally, my thing is that I wouldn't be able to get past the fact that there are no hostages mentioned. Obviously, I see what you're trying to say, but another thing that was very much talked about in the article was the population, like the death counts and all of that stuff. And I think this wasn't really mentioned in the article, and maybe you're going under the assumption that everyone already knows this, but Hamas does operate in civilian areas. The UN has their reports, and obviously there was the whole Al-Shifa hospital thing, so I'm curious what you have to say about that.
About human shields, yeah.
Maybe Ari Blechner could also chime in after.
Yeah, before I directly get to your point, I think it's important to point out that Israel also uses human shields. They use Palestinian civilians to search dangerous areas, including at one point an 80-year-old man. Here's my thoughts on human shields. When you look in Tel Aviv, in downtown Tel Aviv, there's a Mossad office. The Israeli military has offices there. I don't think it's justified for Hamas to go bomb those heavily populated areas. Additionally, the IDF will target an entire residential building to get one Hamas member. I think if Hamas attacked an entire Israeli residential building to get one IDF member, I don't think that would be justified.
Mm-hmm. Blech, do you have anything to say about that?
I think that, when you say that they target an entire residential complex to get one Hamas member, that's after they've dropped leaflets, they've made phone calls, issued evacuation orders, and, sometimes Gazans, Palestinians, whatever, they leave, and, then they don't die when they're killed. But if they're either being told by Hamas, you must stay, or they're choosing by choice to stay, then, the death doesn't fall on the Israeli military. They still have war objectives that they need to complete. And then also, every single rocket that Hamas fires is at a Israeli town, an Israeli building, an Israeli civilian. They've launched rockets into Tel Aviv, whatever. They can't really hit the Mossad office and the Kiryat, which I assume is what you're talking about in Tel Aviv. But Hezbollah has, Yemen, the Houthis have. So, I'm not trying to make a moral equivalence, but, it's just the way the war is fought, that both sides are targeting military infrastructure. One has the ability to hit the military infrastructure, and the other doesn't really have the ability to hit the military infrastructure.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with most of what you're saying. We could go into specifics on the numbers. I will just say that in the war on terror, it was a massive scandal when the Pentagon murdered 7 civilians per 100 airstrikes. In the Gaza war, it's 54 civilians per 100 airstrikes, which has raised alarm bells in the Pentagon. I don't think we're talking about that.
I personally would say that, Israel does attack with the goal of eliminating terrorists. I don't think that they blindly, blow up buildings, do this and that. And we are talking about the most densely populated area on Earth. And, there's people everywhere, and they try their best, but as a result of war, as a result of the, situation that they're in, when you're talking about the war on terror, when America went into Iraq, and specifically the Battle of Fallujah, which is one of the big battles. Fallujah was a town of 300,000 people, and in less than a month, America killed 6,000 people, and the terrorist to civilian ratio was 9-1. In Israel, this has been a huge war for over a year with constant bombing, constant fighting, and yes, while the death count seems high, even if it's reliable, it still doesn't equate and include the Hamas terrorists. And there could be anywhere between 15 to 30,000. I mean, not just Hamas terrorists, but PIJ and all those other organizations. So there, the ratio is anywhere from 1-to-1 to like 1-to-3, which is totally different than the 1-to-9 number.
Yeah. I will say that I can't speak for that specific battle, but I think you're referencing like a specific West Point academic, right? Forgetting his name. Maybe John Spencer, something like that. He said that Israel has a 1-to-1 ratio, while the normal combat rate for like for an urban warfare is like 1-to-9. There are a lot of researchers and former like American generals who say that this is not true. Like Larry Lewis and Wes Bryant. I think his name's Mike Spagat. The problem is that Israel will send out these warnings, go to this area, go to that area, and they'll bomb those areas, including with massive 2,000-pound bombs. And now we're seeing that Israel plans to permanently or for a very long period of time force people to the south, which is because they had told them to leave the north because they were going to bomb the north.
I mean, yeah, they are telling people to leave, and they're generally not hitting the safe areas. Yes, there are times that they have. I will say that, but there's no other way besides for forced displacement to fight this war, because if they don't do forced displacement, keep on moving people around, then they have no way of fighting hand to hand, not hand to hand, but like up close with these Hamas terrorists, because they're in hospitals, they're in mosques, they're in apartment buildings, they're in tunnels underneath all of this. So if you have the population there, then Israel is Israel's saying that they can't fight there.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pushing the people out, and there's like screening processes that the people go through when they leave, and then once everyone's left, or once they've given significant time for people to leave, then that's when they go in heavy with like the tanks, the airstrikes.
Yeah.
And this like new phase of fighting, I think, is just the result of frustration in what the Israeli right is saying as limited military pressure before, because Israel has had its like limits, kind of, where it's we're not going to occupy, we're going to go into this land, we're going to go into this town, we're going to clean it up, and then we're going to leave. Hamas terrorists come back, and hopefully this military pressure induces a hostage deal. And at this point, the Israeli hostage team like left Qatar yesterday because nothing was getting through. They're like, we don't know what else to do. They still have hostages and are making unreasonable demands. They still have military pressure. They still have military strength. We think this is the next step. This is the farther step that we could have done on October 8th. We didn't want to do, but now we're forced to do it almost because we have a problem that we need to get rid of.
Yeah, there is a lot there, so I don't know if I can respond to it all. I will say that there are certain things that Israel has done in the war that human shields don't justify. According to Oxfam, they've deliberately targeted water infrastructure in Gaza for the last, until recently. For 2 months, there was a blockade on all food and medical equipment. I've heard stories from a surgeon who was in Gaza. He said nearly every day he would treat children, patients who have had like sniper gunshot wounds to the head and chest. I don't see how human shields can justify any of that.
Specifically for the aid, like the reason why Israel's so hesitant to give aid and want to give aid is, for starters, besides for like food, other like physical materials, they have dual purpose uses. So like they're, even before October 7th, like they weren't letting in concrete and pipes, and they're now especially being really careful with what they're putting in. And to stop aid now, like specifically that 2-month pause of no aid that they had, was again another tactic to try to force Hamas into a deal, because they're like running out of things that work. And I guess you could argue collective punishment, but the aid going in is already a form of collective punishment, because the Hamas soldiers and terrorists, they take the aid, they take what they need, and then they go to market and sell this food at insanely high prices that the people, so like they're not really getting the aid anyway. Like you could see the videos of like the hostage releases, where all of the Hamas soldiers, they look well fed, they like fresh outfits, and then everyone else is like skinny and in tattered clothes.
Yeah, you made two contradictory points, or seemingly contradictory points. First, you said that the blockade was to prevent dual-use materials from reaching Hamas. And then you said the blockade was to put pressure on Hamas, because I guess like the civilian population would be mad about the blockade. And that's been the stated reason for the blockade for the past 2 months. And you're right, that is collective punishment. That is a war crime. That's why all these nations, like the UK, just said that they're going to look into their trade agreements with Israel to put pressure on them. The world is finally waking up to this.
I mean, I would say that I think it all goes back to the hostages at the end of the day. It feels a little bit weird to be giving the people, and I know the aid is intended to go to the civilians, but at the end of the day, it has been going to Hamas, and it does feel weird to be giving Hamas aid when they have hostages. But going back to something you said before about like the numbers and who to trust, obviously most of us don't believe the Gaza Health Ministry, and what you're saying is you sometimes have iffy thoughts about the IDF numbers or the Israeli numbers. So I'm curious, whose numbers do you believe? Who do you take into account when you're thinking about this?
So I linked to an article in the piece from a source inside Israeli intelligence, saying that they use Hamas's numbers because they say that they're more reliable. They actually say, to the extent that they're not reliable, they're probably an underestimate, because they don't count the people buried under rubble, or who don't make it to the hospital, or aren't killed from military strikes.
I think that we have no clue what the numbers actually are. I think some reasons and issues that I could see with the numbers are, I know specifically on October 7th, the official death count was 1,400, and then it went down to 1,200, and then it started climbing as they were finding more bodies. I think that the quick and instant death count numbers, bombs dropped, we automatically know how many people were killed. I think that's a little suspicious. And then there was also a study done by a Penn Wharton statistics professor. His name was Abraham Weiner, who said that there are mathematical difficulties with the numbers. They seem to be moving on too much of a linear scale, and that taking in all the different factors, that if 20% of the death count is Hamas members, 70% is women and children, that only leaves 10% for non-combatant men. And once you have 10% for non-combatant men, are they just not targeting non-combatant men? Are all men or most men part of Hamas? Or is there an issue with the numbers?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I trust Israeli intelligence. I saw a recent study, I think it was an article in The Economist, saying that the death count in the war is over 100,000. I think that's a lot. I don't think we're really talking about the death count, not just in SAR, but in the religious Zionist community in general.
You mentioned in your article that the death toll increasing in Gaza is a lot due to the IDF loosening their rules of engagement, their rules of engagement. Could you maybe elaborate or specify what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I linked to a New York Times article that says that the IDF has allowed lower ranking people in the military to allow for strikes. And then there's another article in Plus 972 magazine saying that they allowed for this they allowed to strike civilian infrastructure to increase pressure on Hamas.
So again, I would say that the process of the Israeli army dropping bombs, even if they let more people give the final okay, still isn't a, oh, hey, maybe we want to bomb, oh, hey, maybe we want to bomb this, we'll bomb this. Oh, I'm just flying over, that looks interesting, yeah, boom, let me bomb. It's still a, like, long process where it does go up a chain of command. It does need to get approved. There are leaflets and warnings dropped most of the time unless they're trying to assassinate a high-ranking member. And, you know, I know, for example, that they have soldiers going house to house, and they have soldiers risking their lives. A lot of the death count from the soldiers is from IEDs or bombs in the houses collapsing, Hamas shooting RPGs into the houses, and they're continuing to risk their lives going house to house when, you know, if they really did, like, loosen the rules of engagement to, like, a point where they could literally just fly over and end the war now. But they don't want to do that. They're not going to do that. They still have boundaries, lines that they won't cross, rules that they follow, and morals that they keep to.
I will say that the article that I linked to said that in some cases they would murder over 100 civilians per strike, and that was their prediction before the strike, and they still allowed it to go through. That's unprecedented for any Western country.
I mean, it's a while back, but you could look back to World War II, specifically the bombing of Dresden. It was where the Nazis made their weapons. It was, you know, a huge town for them. It's where they got a lot of their military might. And the UK did a series of bombs that killed over 25,000 people in, like, one small town. And, you know, that, I guess, like, you could, like, it's sad that civilians had to die, but that's, like, the overall picture of war. Civilians die in war. So, like, you can't just, like forget about the war and, like, you know, they want to attack us, but they have civilians there. They, you know, they build their bombs, they build their guns, they build their bullets next to a residential building, and we just have to say, okay, we'll take those bullets and not try to defend ourselves is, like, not worth it. It's insane.
2 points. One, I do think that Israel has a right to defend itself. It just matters how it defends itself. And you mentioned Dresden. 80 years later, we look back on Dresden and we say, that was a massive mistake. How did we ever do that? I think 70, 80 years from now, Israel will think the same thing about this war.
I don't think so. I think that the people who were involved in Dresden can't really speak about it now, but that was a huge part of their win that allowed the U.S. and the Allies to defeat Germany. And, you know, I think that Israel is in a tough war, and yes, I 100% agree with you. They do have a right to defend themselves. I think that there's just no win in the way that they defend themselves, and I personally would say that this is how I think that they should defend themselves. I'm curious to hear what you would say on how you think they should defend themselves and what you think their steps and reactions should have been after October 7th.
Well, I disagree with what seems to be the premise that this is the best way to defend itself. Hamas recruits new soldiers by going to families who have had people who were murdered, civilians who were murdered, and because they know that those people are more likely to become radical and become terrorists. I mean, even former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak said that he would have had joined a terrorist organization had he grown up in the occupied territories. So I think that bombing Israel, the blockade on Gaza and the bombing of Gaza, that increases terrorism. It doesn't help Israel.
I think that's, you know, whitewashing and defending terrorism. You don't say that U.S. foreign policy is what caused 9/11, and 9/11 was justified, and ISIS is justified because their qualms with the Western world are okay. they're not ours, but we understand them, so they're allowed to do what they do. Hamas is a terrorist organization, and with the specific intent of destroying Israel and killing as many Jews as possible. That's in their charter, that's their main goal, that's what they want. And, again, Israel has no choice, and because they need to defend themselves. And, again, sometimes civilians get in the way, and I don't know how I would act if I was in that situation, but from an outsider looking in, I would hope to say that these Palestinian people would say, Hamas has caused us more harm than good. We shouldn't join up. The U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, killed 200,000 people. Japan's one of our great enemies. They went to a huge war with Germany. Germany's one of our greatest allies. There needs to be some sort of movement or idea in the Palestinian people that said it's more worth it for us to get over it and make peace, because that's the only way I think it's going to end, if they finally agree to come to the table and say, we're willing to concede, we don't want to be ruled by terrorists, we want peace. And once that hump is overcome, I think the peace talks, all of the highly contested issues become much easier to agree upon.
Yeah, you mentioned the war on terror. I think that did increase terrorists, the amount of terrorists, especially ISIS, was kind of born out of the U.S.'s response to the war on terror. According to the book Talking to the Enemy, many Islamic terrorists barely knew anything about basic Islamic teachings. They actually joined these groups because of the Abu Ghraib massacre and other U.S. war crimes.
That's again one more specific issue, kind of that, the war on terror. But there's been many other wars fought, many, peace treaties after war. Yes, there could be some radicalization, but I think that the radicalization isn't specifically because of the fighting. I think that the fighting helps, and then Iran specifically pushing out a radicalized terrorist ideology and this jihad mindset that these terrorist groups have is what really pushes it, because most of the wars that the U.S. fought, specifically the U.S., they've become allies with the people afterwards. It's, there wasn't some jihad religious fanatic pushing more fighting and, more war when the U.S. declared independence from Britain, fought Britain, and then Britain came back and burned the U.S. Capitol, and then they made peace. They made peace with Germany. They made peace with Japan. Peace happens. It's not just an endless cycle of violence. I think the endless cycle of violence circles back to one place, and that's radicalized jihad Islam pushed by Iran.
2 points. One, there are a lot of terrorist attacks on Israel, especially thinking of the Second Intifada pushed by secular Palestinians. So it's not just radical jihad. And then I think this gets to a point that we really agree on. Even obviously we have a lot of disagreements on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I think we have fundamental values that bring us to the same place. That's why we both want peace.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in your article that Israel is occupying Gaza. Could you expand on that point?
Obviously we know they pulled out in 2005, and it's different than Judea and Samaria, which is a different argument. So.
Yeah. The actual definition of occupation is more liberal. It means having effective control over the area. That's why the Amnesty International, the Red Cross, and I think it's either the ICC or the ICJ say that Gaza is occupied because it's effectively an open-air prison. Israel controls the population registry. They had before the war, they had no-go zones inside Gaza. They control the airspace, the border, and even the sea.
I think that in order to fully understand the quote unquote occupation and this blockade, you have to think about why it happened. Israel pulled out in 2005 and said, we're literally giving you everything. And Hamas was voted into power. They had their civil war and they took control. They burnt everything that the Israelis
Greenhouses.
left, the greenhouses, and decided that we're going to use this place to wage war. And they could have turned it into some oasis on the Mediterranean, Tel Aviv, Herzliya type place, but they specifically chose to elect Hamas, who decided to start building tunnels, shooting rockets, and what usually doesn't get spoken about is that Gaza also shares a border with Egypt. Egypt's restriction on the border is stricter than Israel's. Their fences are higher, their fences are longer, there's more barbed wire. They also are keeping Hamas and the Palestinian people there stuck, because they know that Hamas isn't just an Israel-Palestine issue. It's humanity versus non-humanity. Hamas specifically, and I mean because of Egypt, it's through their connection to the Muslim Brotherhood. But they know what a radicalized terror group it is, and the issue of having an open border and letting the group, not specifically the people on the ground, pass back and forth.
Yeah. First, I'll respond to the part about Egypt's blockade, and then I'll get to Israel's blockade. I will be happy to critique the Egyptian government, but SAR is not an Egyptian national school. When we start hanging up the Egyptian flag and singing the Egyptian national anthem at school-wide meetings, then yes, I'll write an op-ed saying that we should oppose the Egyptian blockade on Gaza. But on Israel, I agree, in principle, that there should be a blockade to prevent weapons, but that's not what it's done. According to the Geshe Institute, Israel is even limiting the amount of fruit that can be imported and exported. At one point, Israel claims it never implemented this, but at one point, Israel even calculated what was the maximum amount of calories it could allow into Gaza without starving the population. I think that shows that, and I said in the article that according to these leaked diplomatic cables, this was meant to put pressure on the population inside Gaza, who would then put pressure on Hamas.
Yeah, I think that Israel what they did with the blockade is to stop weapons and also piss off the people, because once Hamas is never going to stop trying to import weapons, but if they would stop if they would push out Hamas and they would create a power that wants peace, that will stop importing weapons, then the Israeli government and the Israeli blockade wouldn't need to piss them off. Those leaked cables said that they want to push Gaza to the brink of collapse. They don't want to collapse the Gazan economy. They don't want to destroy everything. They just want the people to be upset, because at the end of the day, if they go in and try to overthrow the government themselves, like the Israeli government and the IDF try to overthrow Hamas, that wouldn't work. We're seeing it right now. It doesn't work. If you get the people upset enough at Hamas, then they will stop being in control, and hopefully the new group would stop importing weapons.
I don't think Israel should get brownie points for not creating a humanitarian crisis. Even before October 7th, Gaza had a unemployment rate hovering around 50%, and about 80% of its population relied on international aid. So it did the effect on the economy did hurt the everyday people inside Gaza.
It was supposed to hurt the everyday people. It was supposed to upset the everyday people. We're seeing now some anti-Hamas protests, but this was the goal all along. It needed to be a bottom-up revolution to throw out Hamas. It was never going to be that Hamas willingly steps down. They won't do that. if you make the person angry at their leaders, then they won't want their leaders anymore. That was kind of the goal. And, I think Israel has the right to do that, because Hamas has caused so much harm, so much damage to the Israeli population. They fired over 25,000 rockets, constant terror, suicide bombings, all kidnappings, all of that. They need to go. And the blockade was to ruin their economy so that the people would say, this government is what's holding us back. And we need a new government. We need a new leader, ruler, group that will help us economically.
Yeah. Well, I'm not okay with collective punishment. I also think that if it's because of Israeli pressure on the civilian population, then sure, the civilian population might get rid of the Hamas organization, but their ideology, their radical ideology, is still going to be there, because people are still going to hate Israel. They're going to hate Israel even more. It's going to embolden radical ideology.
I think that, yes, radical ideology exists, but you can't say, oh, it's a forever problem because there's radical ideology. You still have to push for change. You still need to try to get Hamas out, and hopefully you get Hamas out and you reform UNRWA and you stop putting in school textbooks that Jews are the enemy, Jews deserve to die, kill Israelis, that kindergarten graduations are mock killings of IDF soldiers. I think once that stops, then the radical ideology doesn't go away just like that, but it starts to lower down, and the amount of radicalism in the community and society greatly dwindles, and to the point where it's not the same issue that it is now.
Yeah, all I'll say is that State Department report under the Trump administration found that 97% of textbooks don't show an anti-Israel bias.
But 3% do. There still are, I've seen pictures, I've spoken to soldiers who go into houses and see pictures of Hitler, literally it's like your grandfather, your grandmother, your family portrait, and Hitler. There still is radical ideology, and it's because of the constant teaching. That's what they're told. You're told being a martyr is great. You want to die in the name of Allah. Israel is the constant enemy. You need to fight Israel. You need to kill Jews. And I think that that's radicalization, and that comes from the schools, the teachers, all of those people that are supposed to be supposed to be teaching these kids peace, that are supposed to be teaching a whole worldview. I mean, I think there's total radicalization if when a truck is driving by with Jewish bodies and Jewish women, and the reaction in the street is to go out and cheer and spit on the bodies and hit the bodies the way we saw on October 7th. I think that's a totally radicalized society, and I think something in that society needs to change.
I linked to a study in the article that I wrote that talks about how your environment is a much better predictor of whether or not you're going to be a radical terrorist than the teachings that you receive. It's your experiences too.
Well, your experiences are that your role models are radicalized terrorists. Michael Jordan's famous line in advertisement, be like Mike. You want, when your heroes are doing something, when the people you are told are your heroes are doing something, that's your experience. When you're told, be like Mike, kids are going and playing basketball. When you're told, be like Yahya Sinwar, then, you're thinking that's who I want to be. That's what I'm going to do. That's your experience.
Yeah. I don't think I really entirely disagree with you that propaganda can make people terrorists, but like you said earlier, one of the purposes of the blockade was to put pressure on Palestinian civilians.
Yeah, obviously, all of us, I'm assuming you know an IDF soldier in your life, or maybe I'm wrong. Saul has a sister who just served and has a fiance in Miluim. Blechner is having soldiers at his house right now. I'm curious if you would think that the complaints or the upset feeling that SAR alum who are in the IDF who have served have had about your article are valid.
Wait, can I actually add on to that? Do you feel that you possibly painted an IDF soldier as bad or if not worse than a Hamas soldier for what they've been doing?
No, I think that would be a misreading of my piece. And I understand that this is obviously like a very emotional issue that people feel very passionate about. So I definitely understand if that was the way some people read it. I will say that my grandfather protested the Vietnam War, and he knew many soldiers who were drafted, some of them his own friends. He never criticized the Vietnam War out of disrespect towards them. He did it out of disrespect for the war, for the war, the way the war was conducted.
Part of the protests specifically against the Vietnam War were because many Americans felt it wasn't their war. It was a country fighting communism halfway across the globe. Like, why would we care about that? Why are we risking our own lives? The Israel-Gaza war is on the front. It's like right next to it. There's Israelis all over the country that like go to bed and wake up hearing the booms, like seeing the smoke. It's like right there in front of them. They know why they're fighting it. The Israelis who support this war, and even the Israelis who don't support this war, at least know why the war is being fought. And it's a way more rational idea for why the war is being fought than the war specifically in Vietnam. So, I mean, I assumed and I hope that you weren't disrespecting IDF soldiers, and I'm glad we cleared that up. I just think that, we need to understand, like, it's just important to understand why the war is being fought and how much these soldiers are going through to make sure that this war is fought in a way that they and the IDF find moral. And, I think that's important. And, I think that there needs to be recognition of what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree.
Actually, I like the fact that you mentioned Vietnam because the similarity between these two conflicts, even if the fighting is different on the ground in America, both have had big presence on college campuses. So I'm curious, obviously there's peaceful protests, we could all say that's allowed as Americans, but then when you see people in Colombia taking over libraries, like where do you draw the line?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's important to acknowledge the real-life experiences that many Jews on college campuses have. But I also think that we shouldn't generalize and say that an entire movement made up of tens of thousands of students all around the world, including many Jewish students, is anti-Semitic. I also don't like how this issue is kind of both sides. It's like, oh, there's anti-Semitism on the right, there's anti-Semitism on the left, and it's equal and it's both bad. It's just not really true. All academic research on this shows that anti-Semitism is mostly prevalent on the far right, not the far left.
I actually get into this argument with my dad a lot. You have your study. I do not have a study. But let's take, for example, last night where 2 Israeli embassy members were killed. That was a Free Palestine person. At least from my memory, feels like any big thing where Jews felt threatened in the last 7 to 8 years, maybe since the Pittsburgh shooting or the Great Replacement March, which happened in 2017, has been all far left people. What would you say to that? Even though I don't have a study, it's just from my memory and what I've been seeing for the past 8 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I can really address it without something more clear. Like obviously the shooting last night was awful and it's something we've seen way too much in the past 1.5 years.
I have a question. First I need to. Do you believe Israel, or do you believe Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza? Would you make that claim? Maybe not so black and white, but
it's something I've thought a lot about. And I would answer no, just because I don't think there's enough evidence that they're deliberately killing civilians.
Okay. Because I was going to say, I personally believe that if they were, quote unquote, committing a genocide, that they would be doing a terrible job at it. Because if they wanted to, as Ari mentioned earlier in the podcast, Israel could have done a lot of this. They could have gone through Gaza in one day on October 8th, and the war could have just been done, and they could have plowed through. So, they're taking, it seems, such careful steps to make sure they don't do something crazy like that. So how do you think they should be safer as opposed to what they are now?
What do you mean?
I'm saying there's only so much they could do in a war effort, and you're saying that they're going too far and some of it is not okay what they're doing. I'm saying how much safer could they get and what would that look like?
Who's they?
The Israeli government, the IDF.
Like I said, there are some things that human shields don't justify. I mean, Israel has deliberately targeted cemeteries. I don't see how there's any human shields that allows for that. I don't see how targeting water infrastructure is justified by human shields. I also think about the killing of Hind Rajab, a 4-year-old Palestinian girl who was murdered by the IDF. There are also a lot of aid workers who have been targeted. There are so many cases where human shields just don't justify Israel's actions.
Bring it back to SAR. Obviously, the thesis of the article was calling out the SAR community or the staff and not the Israeli government per se. So, and obviously a big topic of discussion, not specific to Israel-Palestine, but just free speech in general. Obviously, Rabbi Harkstad gave a speech about you, became the most popular kid in the school. And a line he said was, but there is no free speech at SAR. And Blechner, I know you're very big on free speech. So I'm curious where you guys draw the line at SAR. Maybe you guys agree more than you think. I'm curious, yeah.
I think I agree with Rabbi Harkstad. I understand why he wouldn't want to publish like an atheist opinion piece in the Buzz or like something criticizing Israel's right to exist. I'd say I pretty much agree with him on that.
I would also say that I agree with Rabbi Harkstad and that there should not be complete free speech. Like I know what a lot of people were saying is, oh, he wrote this article, I'm going to write an article about why Russia is justified in invading Ukraine and why Ukraine is so bad and Putin is good. And it's like, yeah, I don't agree with, like, that's stupid. You can't write that. You shouldn't write that. So
could I just say, I emailed Rabbi J. Kroll that question of a hypothetical, and he responded, if you actually provided the proper sources and the proper things of that nature, that would actually make it a legitimate piece. But
It'd be tough to do.
It would be tough to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so I agree that some stuff shouldn't be said. And the main thesis of your article, I actually had no issue with. I do think that conversation is the key to a solution. Some of my issues with your article were, I mean, they mentioned it, the portrayal of SAR students. I like to believe that I am informed, and, you know, I read a lot on both sides. I've been on the ground in Israel a lot of times, visiting, like, and seeing people all over, talking to people on all different sides of the spectrum. But so that's one. And then another thing was that it felt very one-sided. Like it, you know, what people told me is, I don't know if this was what you were thinking, was that it's obvious, but like, oh, the hostages, it's obvious. I mean, you said that, it's obvious. But I still think that if you're going to publish a piece, like, you need to include more balanced context and balanced content than a rather complete attack on the Israeli government and their actions.
I mean, it was an opinion piece. It showcased my opinions. You're welcome to say I don't have a nuanced opinion. I don't know. Maybe that's a fair critique.
No, yeah, I know it was an opinion piece, but if it's being published in the school newspaper, I'm not saying that the opinion isn't nuanced. I'm saying that the article itself should have been more nuanced.
I think that was a lot of people's issue. That I think you outlined a lot that you were looking to give a broader context to the SAR students, but then a lot of people felt that you were leaving out a lot of that broader context. So what do you have to say to people that tell you that you were maybe being a little contradictory there by leaving out some stuff from the Israeli side while also claiming to be giving a broader context?
It's very similar to the earlier question, so I guess I just have to give a similar response. I don't have to convince anyone at SAR the Israeli perspective. We hear it all the time. That's all I have to say.
To combat that, I would say as a whole, the school's job as a modern Orthodox institution, the Zionism is a key value of our sect of Judaism. So, and especially when you leave SAR, everything we're hearing is Gaza, free Palestine. Like, what you portray it to be in SAR is what it is the opposite out in the outside world. Would you agree with that general take? That when you leave SAR, all you're hearing is about Palestine. So I think personally that SAR, and it definitely does, having done the education system, Israel education twice over, that they definitely do give the other side. I think it's kind of SAR's job. If maybe they are a little too over Israel, empathetic, whatever you want to say, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because when you leave the building, you're getting the complete opposite. That's my personal take on it. Yeah.
I'd completely agree with that. I mean, it's part of our values, and I also, but you're saying that right when we leave the building, but we mention this all the time in our podcast. I think SAR actually does do a good job of preparing you. And in our modern Israel class, which you'll get to 2 years, me and Ari both had Rabbi Helfka, and he would show us how many Al Jazeera videos did we watch?
Probably like 6.
Yeah, we watched a good. There's not that many classes.
Yeah,
we really do take a deep dive, which I think was my biggest issue, was that, I mean, it's not fair you haven't got into it yet, but that to say that, the SAR education isn't portrayed, I think SAR actually does prepare you a lot more than maybe you have experienced.
I think, again, this is mostly like a vibes-based decision to say that we don't really hear enough of the Palestinian perspective inside SAR. Even with those curriculums, all of the speakers we've had are like pro-Israel speakers. I don't remember hearing like a pro-Palestinian speaker at SAR.
Well, I think that would be going against. That would be going against the school's values, as in, no, they obviously have the values of hearing other sides, but there's also the value of Zionism. And I mean, obviously you can bring in the speaker that's maybe more to the left, but even the term pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel could be used on the same person hypothetically.
Yeah.
But like, I know that my brother said, actually, when he was here, they brought in a Palestinian speaker, and someone asked him, like, why do you guys deny the Holocaust? And he was backtracking on his answer, and didn't have and I don't think it went well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know so I thought they probably it's clear they probably have tried that. But do you have any other possible solutions to your perceived problem of this issue?
I said in the piece, I gave 3 solutions.
Yeah, you said interfaith dialogue was one of them.
Interfaith dialogue, yeah, like inviting a Muslim school to something like the SARs program that we do. Having more Palestinian speakers, yeah, it's in the piece.
But the issue is, do these Muslim schools have Israeli? I mean, there's an Israeli hostage coming to speak tomorrow, right? I mean, would a Muslim school have an Israeli hostage come speak at their school to give their side? Have you seen that?
I don't know. I'm asking the wrong guy. But I think it's valid. I think I agree though. Like if this Muslim school said we support October 7th or something like that, then obviously we should not.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're mentioning that there are solutions, but I think part of the issue, and I guess you could argue that we don't have to just follow whatever a Muslim school is doing, whatever the Muslim schools plural are doing, but that they are not also the Muslim school would not have an Israeli hostage or an Israeli that survived October 7th come share their story, because that wouldn't make sense for their school's values.
Again, if I went to that Muslim school, then I would write an op-ed about hearing the other side's perspective, but I don't.
I think specifically SAR has, at least in the academy, when I was in 8th grade, they wanted to bring in another perspective, so they had Jamal Bowman speak to us. And
didn't go so well.
It was going fine until they opened up the floor to questions, and someone, it was actually a teacher, started grilling him on his Israel stance. And then it was okay, he's going, bye, boom, and then he left. And whatever, that night, he goes on huge anti-Israel tirade. It was actually about the COVID vaccine and how, whatever. So I think that, yes, interfaith dialogue is important, and it would be great to have, Muslim people, Palestinians, speak to us about their experience. But I think that there's an issue in specifically finding someone who's more moderate, in the sense that, don't support October 7th, thinks Hamas should go, understands that Israel has the right to exist, but then also sees the issue with the Palestinians, the side with the Palestinians. Like, that's a person that I would be fine speaking to at SAR, but I don't know how easy or how hard it would be to find people like that.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree. I would just say I think it would be easier. I don't have anything else to add. Yeah, I think we mostly agree.
I'm curious what you think about Richie Torres, because you said that you hang in left-leaning circles, and obviously Richie Torres is on most issues considered more to the left. But then when it comes to Israel, he seems to be very supportive of the war effort even till this day. So I'm curious, how you vibe with that.
Here's what I think about it. He accepts a lot of money from AIPAC. Obviously, there are a lot of Jews in his district, so I wonder if that kind of influences his thinking.
Qatar is also doing all these money things.
To American politicians?
They just gifted Trump a plane.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think that plane, the total money of that plane is more than AIPAC money spent combined on all politicians.
I like Trump's response. Trump was like, why wouldn't I take a plane?
Yeah.
They do not spend billions on. They only started funding campaigns in 2022. No,
correction, and not billions. I think the overall Israel lobby is over.
I think that's specifically the number, directly to politicians, is less than the amount that plane from Qatar costed. But
I 100% agree.
But even back to the college protest thing, that's all. Qatar money is going right into that.
Many colleges and universities get money. I was just reading an article on NBC, an investigative article saying that there's very little evidence that actual protesters are receiving money from Arab countries.
But I mean, they're getting spearheaded by the institution.
Yeah, even if it's not direct, you could say
it's
that
trickle down.
It's trickle down. The people leading these institutions. You have professors that are saying in class, you're exempt from a test if you go to this protest.
It'd be like
happening at Michigan.
If SAR got a bunch of money from these places to teach us certain things, we would probably align with those certain things. I mean, I guess you might be the might be the exception, not the rule. But I feel like you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Again, if I went to a school that accepted Qatari money, then I probably would also write an op-ed. I think it's important to point out that many colleges also have investments in Israeli firms, which might also influence their thinking on these issues.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I mean, we like to end the podcast asking about a criticism of SAR, and obviously we know you're number one, but I guess what's your number two criticism of SAR that you would like changed? If you had something to say, then Blechner, you can give your answer after.
Can I go second? I think I might need to think on
Okay,
Yeah.
Blechner, go ahead.
Okay, so I practice this one for my college interviews. My criticism with SAR is they're very rigid in your schedule and the classes that you can take, and even the classes that they offer. Like, they say, senior year, you get to choose your class, but they fall within 5 bands. There were many classes that I wanted to take this year that I didn't get to take. You only get 2 choices junior year if you want to take AP Bio or AP US History.
Now, I think now there's Chem and Lang.
Yeah, but I do agree with the point where I don't know. I think it's a little weird for SAR to make the overarching decision that I can't handle more APs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I feel like it kind of does you a favor. It does you a favor.
But
that's the whole thinking about it.
But what if you wanted to take more?
You could always take on your own if you're that committed.
I just think that it's not like just SAR. It's more, different schools, different levels in the Yeshiva League. But I feel like in public schools there's more option of what you want to learn specifically, and that is something that I think SAR could and should do better. Just give more different classes and then the opportunity to take these different classes.
I think my take is maybe the exact opposite.
Welcome to SAR.
You guys seem to agree a lot.
I was talking to Dr. Hoffman about this, and he says that in the dual curriculum system, we have no free time, and I think that's so true. I think if you compare the amount of sleep Yeshiva League schools students get compared to public school students, we would get way less because we end later and we have a ton of work and way more classes.
And start earlier.
Yeah, my dad talked to this on the last podcast. My dad went to public school, and he would get off at like 2:30, and he's saying he doesn't. My dad doesn't get how we do it, and even when kids in Chile get to college, they're like, it's kind of a breeze. We have so much time to do work, and like we used to get off at 5 o'clock. If you extracurriculars, you're home at 8:30. Yeah, I really agree with that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
It's been great to have both you guys on. That was an amazing episode.
Didn't get too out of hand.
I think that was the pinnacle of civil discourse here at SAR.
Exactly. All right.
This has been the SAR Experience with Saul and Caleb. See you guys.